What if I told you that one quiet evening in a forgotten farming town, Donald Trump made a secret promise to a little girl? A promise so powerful it changed her family's life forever. This is the story the world has never heard. It was a cold evening in the small farming town of Millfield. The sun had almost disappeared, leaving the sky painted in shades of orange and purple. The wide fields, stretching as far as the eye could see, glowed faintly in the fading light, as though the land itself was holding on to the last breath of the day. Families were gathering inside their modest homes for supper, the smell of bread and stew drifting through the air. But just beyond the town's edge, something unusual was stirring. The quiet, familiar sound of crickets was broken by a deep rumble. A convoy of sleek black SUVs rolled down the dirt road, their headlights cutting through the dust that rose like smoke behind them. Engines growled, tires crunched against gravel, and the rhythm of the town was interrupted. People stepped outside, confused. Millfield wasn't the kind of place that saw visitors, let alone powerful ones. For years, they had felt forgotten, left behind while the rest of the world moved forward. But that evening, fate decided to write a different story. From one of the SUVs, the door opened, and out stepped Donald Trump. The moment his polished shoes touched the dusty ground, gasps filled the air. Mothers clutched their children's hands. Farmers leaned on their tools, whispering in disbelief. Some stood frozen, others rushed closer for a better look. "What's he doing here?" one farmer muttered, his voice carrying through the crowd. Trump was dressed in his signature navy suit and unmistakable red tie. The sharp contrast of his clean, powerful presence against the worn-down backdrop of Millfield was almost surreal. But what shocked the townspeople most was not just that he was there, it was how he was there. No reporters, no flashing cameras, no grand speeches prepared, just a small team that hung back quietly as Trump walked forward. Instead of striding past the crowd with an air of superiority, he paused. His gaze swept slowly across the town, over the peeling paint on old wooden homes, the rusting fences, the cracked tractors that sat unused at the edge of barns. And then his eyes lingered on the people themselves. Men with calloused hands, women with lines of exhaustion etched across their faces, children with both wonder and weariness in their eyes. These were hardworking people who had given everything to the soil, but received so little in return. For once, it seemed, someone important was really looking at them. And then, something unusual happened. Just a few steps away, standing near a broken wooden fence, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 10 years old. While other children hid shyly behind their parents, she stood alone, watching him with steady curiosity. In her arms, she clutched a worn-out notebook, its corners frayed, the cover smudged with dirt and fingerprints. She held it tightly, as if it contained her entire world. Her eyes were wide, not with fear, but with something deeper: curiosity, sadness, and the faint glow of hope. For reasons no one could explain, Trump's attention was immediately drawn to her. In that crowded moment, with dozens of eyes watching, it was as though the rest of the world faded. He saw not just a child, but a story waiting to be told. And that's where everything began to change. Her name was Emily, a quiet, thoughtful child who carried more weight in her small shoulders than most her age. She was the daughter of John Miller, one of the oldest and most respected farmers in Millfield. For generations, the Millers had worked the same soil, plowing it under scorching suns and freezing winds, always believing that no matter how hard life became, the land would provide. But in recent years, the land had turned stubborn. Seasons came and went with little to offer. Crops wilted, rains were late, and the debts piled higher than the haystacks in the Miller barn. John did his best to hide his worries, but Emily wasn't blind. She noticed the cracks in her father's boots, the lines deepening on his face, and the way his voice grew quieter when he spoke about the future. Still, Emily never complained. She adored her father. To her, John Miller was the strongest man in the world. No matter how heavy the burdens grew, she believed he could carry them. But deep inside, Emily feared something he couldn't protect her from: the loss of their home. That night, when the unexpected visitor stepped out of the black SUV, most children shrank back behind their parents. The tall figure in a dark suit, with the famous red tie, didn't belong in their small, worn-down town. He was larger than life, a man they had only seen on television, someone connected to power and wealth far beyond their reach. But Emily was different. She didn't hide. She didn't retreat into the shadows of the crowd. Instead, she stepped forward. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her worn-out notebook, the one she carried everywhere. It was her little treasure chest, filled with sketches, words, and dreams too big to say aloud. And tonight, something inside her told her this was the moment to open it. Trump noticed her almost instantly. Perhaps it was the way she stood, unafraid yet vulnerable. Or perhaps it was the way her eyes seemed to search for something deeper than a handshake. Whatever it was, he found himself walking toward her. The crowd fell silent, watching. Farmers exchanged puzzled glances. Mothers held their children close. It was an odd sight, the powerful man and the small girl, face to face in the middle of a dusty street. Emily lifted her chin. Her voice was shy but steady, carrying more courage than her years should have allowed. "Mr. Trump," she said softly, "can I tell you something?" Chepchin Trump blinked in surprise. He wasn't used to being addressed like this, not without hesitation, not without formality. He bent down slightly so he could look her in the eyes. "Sure, sweetheart," he said, his voice gentler than the crowd expected. "What's on your mind?" Emily opened her notebook with careful fingers. The paper inside was creased, smudged with pencil marks, but it carried something priceless, her heart. She held it out, showing him a drawing she had made. It was a picture of their family farm. The details were childlike but full of meaning. The old red barn, the crooked fence, the wide field stretching toward the horizon. She had even drawn her father, standing tall in the middle of the land, hands on his hips like a guardian of the soil. Trump studied the sketch for a moment, his expression unreadable. To anyone else, it might have looked simple, like any child's drawing. But Emily's eyes told a deeper story. "This is our farm," she whispered, almost as if admitting a secret. "My daddy says we might lose it, but I don't want to. It's the only home we have." Her voice cracked slightly on the last words, and for a brief moment, the whole world seemed to pause. Tepchin Trump payers all. The townspeople held their breath. No one moved. It was as though every sound, the chirping of crickets, the rustle of wind in the fields, even the creak of the wooden fence, had gone silent, waiting for his response. The ensure that Trump hair, everyone expected Trump to brush it off, to pat her on the head, offer a polite smile, and move on. After all, powerful men had come and gone before, offering words that vanished as quickly as they were spoken. But instead, something unusual happened. Trump didn't look away. He didn't reach for the next hand to shake or the next person to greet. His gaze remained locked on Emily's hopeful eyes, and for the first time that night, his carefully constructed composure shifted. There was a flicker, just a flicker of something softer. In Emily's trembling words, he didn't just hear a child's plea. He heard the voice of every struggling farmer, every family fighting to hold on to what little they had, every dream that risked being buried under the weight of debt and despair. And in that moment, Donald Trump did something no one expected. He stayed silent. But it was not the silence of dismissal. It was the silence of a man who was listening, who was weighing something far more important than politics. Emily's little notebook, with its smudges and shaky lines, had managed to pierce through the noise of power and reach a place rarely touched, a place of quiet humanity. The crowd waited, watching, wondering. Would he make a promise? Would he walk away? Or would this small encounter in a forgotten town become something far greater than anyone imagined? Trump placed his hand gently on Emily's small shoulder. The crowd hushed, leaning in, trying to catch every word. His voice was calm but carried a weight that instantly silenced even the whispers. "You love this farm, don't you?" he asked, his tone not that of a politician, but of a man genuinely seeking an answer. Emily's head bobbed quickly, her wide eyes shimmering in the glow of the setting sun. She clutched her notebook tighter against her chest, as if holding on to her entire world. "It's where my mom taught me to plant flowers," she said softly, her voice trembling with honesty. "It's where my daddy works every day. If we lose it," she hesitated, her voice cracking slightly. "If we lose it, we'll have nothing." Her words, simple and unpolished, carried a truth that no statistic, no speech, and no report could ever capture. A child's voice had pierced through the noise of politics and landed straight into the heart of the moment. Trump's gaze shifted. Just a few steps behind Emily stood John Miller, her father. He was a man of quiet pride, shoulders broad from years of labor, hands rough and scarred by the soil he had worked since boyhood. But that night, his strength seemed shadowed by defeat. His face, worn by both sun and sorrow, told the story of a man who had fought battles with the earth and with debt and was losing. John's eyes met Trump's for a brief second. He didn't speak, didn't plead, didn't bow his head. Pride wouldn't allow him to beg. But there, in that silent exchange, his weary eyes said everything words could not. Help us, before it's too late. In that instant, something shifted in Donald Trump. This wasn't a rally stage. There were no cameras rolling, no headlines waiting to be printed. There was only a man, a farmer, standing on the brink of collapse, and a little girl whose innocence carried the weight of hope for her family. Trump bent down closer, lowering himself so that his face was level with Emily's. His voice dropped to a near whisper, meant only for her. "Emily," he said, his words deliberate, "I'm going to make you a promise. I'll make sure your daddy never loses this farm. That's my word to you." The girl's breath caught in her throat. Her big brown eyes widened as though she had just been handed a miracle. "Really?" she whispered back, almost afraid to believe it. Trump gave a small, steady smile, one that felt different, warmer, more human. He placed the worn notebook back into her tiny hands and pressed it gently. "Really, but this is just between you and me, okay? A secret promise." Emily's face lit up instantly, brighter than any lamp in Millfield that night. Her fear seemed to melt away, replaced with a spark of hope so strong it was almost visible. She nodded eagerly, clutching her notebook like it was the most precious gift she had ever received. The crowd, meanwhile, watched in silence. To them, it seemed like a simple exchange. A man kneeling to listen to a child, offering comfort before moving on. They didn't hear the quiet words. They didn't feel the secret vow that had just been made. But Emily knew, and so did her father. John Miller, standing tall but weary, blinked back the sting in his eyes. He had expected nothing that night. No miracles, no saviors, no sudden answers. But when he saw the way his daughter's face glowed with hope, he realized something extraordinary had happened. For Trump, it wasn't politics. It wasn't strategy. It was instinct. In Emily's trembling words and John's weary eyes, he had seen a reflection of every small town, every struggling family, every dream at risk of being crushed under the weight of circumstances. And in that moment, he chose to act, not with grand gestures or public announcements, but with a quiet promise sealed in trust. The night air seemed different after that. The murmurs of the crowd returned, but softer now, as if they, too, sensed something unspoken had just occurred. Trump rose back to his full height, adjusted his tie, and gave Emily one last look, a look that said far more than words ever could. Then, without fanfare, he turned toward the gathering crowd, shaking a few hands, nodding politely, before walking back toward his waiting SUV. Emily stood frozen in place, still holding her notebook. Her little heart pounded with excitement, her mind replaying every word he had whispered. A secret promise, a promise just for her. She glanced back at her father. He didn't say anything, but for the first time in months, there was the faintest flicker of relief in his tired eyes. That night, when Emily opened her notebook again, she carefully traced over the drawing of their farm. Beside it, with her small handwriting, she added 3 words that she would never forget for the rest of her life. "He promised me." The crowd might not have known it, the world might never hear it, but a quiet deal had been sealed in the heart of a little girl, one that would carry more meaning than anyone could imagine. Over the following weeks, Millfield began to notice changes. Small at first, almost unremarkable, but enough to stir whispers among the townsfolk. John Miller, who had carried the heavy weight of looming debt for years, suddenly received a call from his local bank. The banker's tone was different, gentler, almost cautious. Instead of harsh deadlines and impossible demands, they offered to restructure his loans. They spoke of new arrangements and unexpected flexibility, words John had never heard from them before. It was as if an invisible hand had swept in, forcing the system to show compassion where none had existed. John hung up the phone that day, staring at it in disbelief. For years, the bank had been his greatest source of worry, tightening its grip around his farm like a vice. And now, out of nowhere, They were giving him room to breathe. But that was only the beginning. Within days, farm equipment that had sat rusting and broken for months was replaced. A new tractor appeared, gleaming red against the dull gray of the barnyard, its engine humming like a promise of better harvests to come. Parts that John could never afford suddenly arrived in crates at his doorstep, delivered by companies he hadn't even ordered from. "Must be a mistake," he muttered more than once, running his hand over the smooth steel. But the deliveries kept coming. Bags of seed, high quality, the kind he had only dreamed of planting, arrived neatly stacked. Fertilizers, tools, and even fuel vouchers showed up in unmarked envelopes. Every time John tried to track the source, he reached a dead end. It was a miracle wrapped in mystery. The people of Millfield noticed too. Neighbors whispered, wondering if John had come into money or if some distant relative had left him a fortune. Some suspected charity groups, others guessed at government programs. But John himself had no answers. And yet there was one person who did know: Emily. She carried her worn-out notebook everywhere, as if it were a treasure chest holding the greatest secret in the world. Each time another mystery gift arrived, she would press the notebook against her chest and smile quietly to herself. She didn't tell anyone, not even her father. But deep inside she knew the truth. Mr. Trump had kept his word. He had promised her, in a hushed voice only she could hear, that her daddy would never lose the farm. And now she could see that promise unfolding before her very eyes. Not in loud announcements or public declarations, but in quiet, steady acts that only she seemed to understand. One evening after a long day in the fields, John sat heavily at the wooden dinner table. The flickering lamp above them cast warm light on the room, but his face was still shadowed with confusion. Emily sat across from him, nibbling on a piece of bread, her eyes bright with secrets she couldn't share. "Emily," John finally said, breaking the silence, "I don't know how to explain this." He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "For years I've been fighting to keep this farm alive. Every door I knocked on was slammed in my face. Every bit of help I asked for came with chains attached. But now it feels different. It feels like someone's watching over us." Emily froze for a moment, her small hands tightening around her notebook. She wanted to tell him everything, that the man in the suit, the one everyone thought would just pass through town and forget them, had made her a secret promise. She wanted to say that she had been carrying that promise close to her heart, and that every seed, every tool, every phone call was proof that it was real. But she remembered his words: "This is just between you and me, a secret promise." So instead, she slid off her chair and walked to her father's side. Wrapping her little arms tightly around him, she whispered into his tired chest, "I think everything's going to be okay, Daddy." John's eyes softened. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe it. The farm still had its struggles, the future still uncertain, but hope had returned. Crops seemed to grow taller, brighter. John worked with a vigor he hadn't felt in years, pushing his new tractor across the fields, his hands steady, his back straighter. And though he never knew the source of their sudden blessing, he knew one thing for certain: something or someone was keeping them afloat. And as Emily sat under the fading evening sun, sketching in her notebook once again, she knew what her father didn't. She knew that promises, when made in silence and sealed with sincerity, could change everything. Because one night, a man the world thought they knew had whispered to her a vow, and though the town was still guessing, she carried the truth quietly in her heart. Mr. Trump had kept his secret promise. Months later, Millfield was no longer the same place it had been. What was once a town heavy with worry now carried a quiet sense of renewal. The Miller farm, once on the verge of collapse, was now alive again. Rows of green fields stretched under the golden sun, crops swayed in the breeze, and the sound of machinery echoed with life. Emily skipped barefoot along the fence line, her old notebook clutched tightly to her chest. Her heart still held the secret that no one else knew. Each time she saw her father smiling as he worked, she whispered to herself, "He kept his promise." Then one late afternoon, a familiar sight stirred her heart. A small convoy of black SUVs rolled down the dusty road once more. This time there were no reporters, no photographers, no crowds waiting for a spectacle. Just the same quiet presence that had appeared months before. The doors opened, and there he was, Donald Trump. Emily froze for only a moment before running toward him, her notebook bouncing in her hands. "Mr. Trump," she cried, her voice filled with joy. She reached him, her cheeks flushed from excitement, and threw her arms around his leg. "You kept your promise," she said softly, her voice trembling with gratitude. Trump crouched down, looking at her with a rare softness in his eyes. "I told you, Emily," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "A promise is a promise." Behind them, John Miller approached. His boots crunched on the gravel as he walked, slower than usual. His pride still strong, but his heart overflowing. When he finally reached Trump, he stopped for a long moment, trying to find the right words. "I don't know what you did," John said, his voice rough with emotion. "But from the bottom of my heart, thank you. You didn't just save a farm, you saved my family." Trump rose to his feet and extended his hand. John hesitated only briefly before grasping it firmly. For a few seconds, the two men stood there, one carrying the scars of endless battles in the fields, the other carrying the weight of 1,000 political storms. Trump gave a simple nod, his expression unreadable. He didn't speak of favors, didn't demand recognition, didn't want to explain. And before John could say anything more, Trump released his hand, turned, and began walking back toward the waiting SUV. The engine started, headlights flaring against the twilight. Emily stood by the fence, her notebook still in her arms, watching as the vehicles disappeared down the dirt road and into the night. He hadn't stayed for dinner. He hadn't asked for thanks. He hadn't even let the world know what he had done. But Emily knew. For the rest of her life, she would keep that notebook safe. On the very first page, beside the sketch of her family's farm, she had written 4 simple words in neat, careful handwriting. Trump kept his promise. And though history books would never record it, though the world would never know the full story, a farmer's daughter always carried the memory of a secret promise that saved her home and changed her life forever. The truth you just saw is only half the story. Want the rest? Hit that subscribe button. The secrets are just getting started.